Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to be able to talk about the MTrain project on behalf of my colleagues and the consortium that's looking after the European Medicines Research Training Network. Now, I have to say, Deborah's presentation is very difficult to follow in terms of she presented that so clearly and showed you such a nice video that I feel that since I don't have some of the animations, I'm going to have to try and interest you in other ways. So the first point to interest you is to say, since we're talking about education and training, there ought to be some sort of objectives for this session. So I have two objectives for you. Maybe at the end you can tell me whether we've met those objectives. The first is that you have a much better understanding of the importance of the education and training projects and how that underpins all of the work in terms of the new science and the changes that we're hoping to produce in Europe. So that's number one, you understand it. And number two, what I hope is that you all go back to your respective hospitals, universities, ministries, companies, wherever, and tell your colleagues so that we actually do get much greater coverage and more people actually understand what's going on. So two simple objectives, which certainly apply to my presentation, and I hope will apply to the others as well. But again, maybe I can start with a quiz, because it is after lunch. So does anyone know what this picture is? Got a very quiet audience. It's a picture of Angkor Wat. But the reason for showing it is that this is really a demonstration of what was a very advanced civilization that had an extraordinarily complicated and sophisticated infrastructure of temples and support, but had completely disappeared. And not only disappeared, was then actually taken over by the forest, so you can see how the trees have grown over and actually destroyed what was an example of a civilization at its peak. And the reason for showing that is to say that just because somebody or some culture has been successful does not guarantee success in the future. And although we're all very proud of what Europe has actually managed to achieve in terms of science and some of the education and training activities, that does not guarantee us success in the future. And we need to make sure that we don't become like Angkor Wat, and that we were very good, but we then disappear and there's no longer any continuity, and some of that research might have moved to other parts of the world. So that's what we want to avoid. So in terms of what patient needs and what Europe needs, you're going to see some recurrent themes. And one of those themes is that we really do need to do something to enhance and support the education training landscape in Europe. We need to continuously improve that so that it doesn't deteriorate. And you'll see that the areas we're particularly looking at are stimulation of innovation, looking at Europe's global leadership and trying to maintain that, particularly in medicines research. And from the patient's point of view, looking at how we can develop new, safer, more effective medicines so that the patients can actually derive the benefit. And we want to move from a system that worked, the abacus there on the top, which was fine in the past, to something which really does reflect the latest technology and whatever is necessary to maintain that, with the iPad, which is the latest I could find in terms of demonstrating it. So we do need to shift. If anyone goes out of this room feeling that there isn't a sense of urgency in terms of changing education and training in Europe, then we failed. This is urgent, and it is being addressed and needs to be addressed quickly. So what is MTrain going to do about it? On the side there, you'll see we've described that MTrain needs to do several things. It needs to establish this pan-European platform. And someone at the back asked what was happening with some of the other member states. The intention is that this will be, during the course of the project, something that supports education, research and training throughout Europe indeed all 27 member states and the associated states and the new states. So the intention is a very broad platform. It also needs to be sustainable. It needs to continue, not just for the life of the project, but to be able to continue after that, so that it's not just a short burst of activity. And we're looking at ways of doing that at the moment. And it also has to cover all aspects of drug development, so that we're looking at the very early phases in discovery, from the actual molecule and looking at the disease targets, all the way through the development of the medicine, and indeed when those medicines are on the market, and maintaining them. And some of the individual projects, as you heard from Deborah, are actually addressing certain areas of that. In the case of EU2P, the pharmacovigilance; in the case of the other projects, other parts of that chain. But the intention is to be able to cover all elements of that. And then you're probably sitting there asking the very good question, well, how are we going to do it? And one of the ways and the opportunity we have now is to do something different because of the people we have and because of these partnerships, and particularly these partnerships between people who didn't previously work together quite so easily, whether that was from academia or the regulatory authorities or from the industry or the scientific groups. And one of the big advantages we found of IMI is that it actually gives us an umbrella to work together across some of those traditional boundaries. So we can sit down and talk to the regulators, and we can sit down and talk to our colleagues in other companies or from academia or wherever else the members of the consortium come from. And you'll see here a list of some of those groups who are involved within the MTrain project. And I'll tell you a little bit more about them later, but you can see that we have a group representing the biomedical science infrastructures in Europe, that we have a group representing the FPA companies. We include our colleagues from the other education and training projects so that we can work in a coordinated way. We look at the other IMI projects, the scientific projects, to see what new science is emerging or what might need to be incorporated as cutting-edge science into the new training programs. And we look at a broad selection of external stakeholders so we can make sure that we are getting the necessary input, that we are meeting the needs in terms of education and training, but that we are meeting the needs in terms of supporting research in Europe and the more rapid development of new medicines. So you can see a broad group of people working together very effectively in partnership to be able to address that. And why is it innovative? Partly for the reasons I mentioned. Partly that this is unique. We have never had the opportunity to work together in such a coordinated way to address some of these important problems. It's unique because we're looking at a pan-European platform and expanding it broadly, even though some of the projects will start in a more focused way. We're looking at building on previous success. This isn't a matter of saying we have a clean sheet of paper, we'll start from scratch and we'll come up with wonderful ideas. We're looking to see what has previously been done in public-private partnerships. We're looking to see what has previously been done in terms of the best practice for education training, and looking to see how we can actually make that even more effective, given the need for the updates for the changing environment. And maybe this is one place that I feel we're going to have the greatest impact, and this is really empowering people to take control of their own education and training needs, partly by making it clear to them and providing some sort of guidance as to what's required, some guidance as to what's available. So here we're looking at producing a course catalogue for the first time, pan-European, so you'd identify quality courses anywhere in Europe and can pick which ones are most appropriate for your own needs, and indeed supporting people to build their own portfolios of competency, particularly in a world where we're now working across some of the traditional professionals and looking at much more in terms of cross-functional working rather than some of the more traditional silo working. And as you'd expect, the process of reviewing the success and continuing to improve that during the life of the project is built into that.